Welcome, everyone, all you ladies who are launching and all you ladies who launch allies. What a great Tuesday this is to get to have a webinar talking all about funding, a topic near and dear to every woman entrepreneur I've ever spoken to. It's show me the money, and often the showing of the money can be quite slow and quite painful. And we're going to dig in a little deeper with our three amazing panelists this afternoon, wherever you are, to talk about some of those issues. This whole webinar was really started by a look that we did at a company called DocSend's analysis of what exactly is going on when financiers look at all the decks, all the pitch decks that you all put together. So I'm going to welcome three amazing women. So starting with Andrea Silvers, who's the Director of Communications at DocSend. She's going to talk about what it takes to really be successful and what the findings were from that DocSend report. And then I'm going to turn it over to April and Nikki Dominguez, two minority women founders behind Handsome. And if you're not using Handsome, you should take a look at it, particularly if you are in the hairstyling baffle industry. And one amazing stat they told me when we did our prep for this call is there are actually more barbers and hairstylists in the United States than policemen, policewomen, and doctors. And yet there is no central place for education, for community building, and so on. So that is what Handsome is and why Handsome is going to be an incredibly successful company. So let me start first with Andrea. Maybe if you could just kick us off. Tell us a little bit about your background, what you do at DocSend, and give us a little bit of a sense for that report and some of the findings.
Absolutely. So hello, everybody. I'm Andrea. I have been working in tech for about 10 years, most of that actually outside of the US. I've worked in the UK, I've worked in Canada, I've worked in New Zealand before finally making my way back to Los Angeles. I am the Director of Content and Communications at DocSend, and DocSend is a secure document sharing platform. We're like a Google Docs, but on steroids. So we give you page-by-page analytics, security and control over all of your documents, which is how we've gotten to this great data. So when I started, we were about to kick off a new fundraising research project. Our founders had done it in 2015, which was sort of an under the hood look, the only under the hood look at what a fundraising round really entails. Because as I'm sure you guys will continue to share, that a lot of founders aren't really behooved necessarily to tell you how awful fundraising is. People are like, oh, I went out and I raised in 3 weeks and I got $3 million and it was great. And all of that. But in reality, it's a hard slog and you hear a lot more no's than you hear yeses. And that's kind of true across the board. So we did this research project where we dug into how many investors did you contact? How many weeks were you fundraising? And then give us a link to your pitch deck. And we will actually look at aggregate across all of these founders, where a VC is spending time in your pitch deck. What page is the most important to them? What page are they skipping over in almost every deck that they don't really care about? And we decided this time around, unlike in the 2015 data, we decided to add some demographic data to our questions. So we were able to see all male teams versus all female teams. And when we decided to process that data, I mean, you kind of know what you think you're gonna see, but you don't really know. And it came back exactly what you would expect, unfortunately. Women have a harder time raising. They reach out to more investors. They have more meetings, which is, you would think would be a good thing, but they actually raise significantly less money in every round. And we actually found a very big discrepancy in the way VCs specifically look at their pitch decks and read a pitch deck from an all-female team versus a pitch deck from an all-female or all-male team after they've seen the team slide.
So Andrea, put us a little out of our misery. Tell us, what are those pages? What are the pages that are most important for women entrepreneurs based on your data and the trends you're seeing, and maybe compare and contrast that to all male teams or even mixed teams?
Absolutely. So the thing that came through immediately in the data was the traction section. And we define traction, and this was for early stage companies. So when you're early stage, your product might not even be in the market. So your traction is a letter of intent, a few customer quotes, some feedback from your beta. Like traction is really loosey-goosey at that stage. It's not like this is our exact revenue. And we split out financials into a different category. So decks from all female teams, VCs spent 50% more time reviewing the traction of those decks, which sounds like a good thing. But what we discovered in this is that more time on a deck, any deck, is actually bad. VCs have gotten very efficient over the years at reading pitch decks. So the average time on a pitch deck is between 3 and 3.5 minutes, which is quite long if you actually think about it. But we found it's very standard. Like it's a flip, flip, flip as they go through your deck and they read your narrative. And if it makes sense, it's a very clean read, the kind of, not much differentiation between each of the slides. And they get to the end and your fundraising ask is typically at the end. They'll spend some time looking at your fundraising ask. How much money do you need? Where are those funds going? So less time overall in every category is far better, except your fundraising ask. That's the only place you want to see a VC spending more time. So in all female decks, 50% more time on traction, which means they're scrutinizing a traction slide that could have a daily active user number and a collection of a few quotes, like nothing that's, this is a pre-seed company. They also spent 24% more time on the product slides. Did you build this product? Do you really have it? What does it really do? And they spent 30% less time on the fundraising ask, which is a clear signal before you ever even walk in the door that they don't have any intention of funding you, because they didn't look at how much money you needed. They didn't look at where those funds were being allocated. So you kind of get that signal before you ever show up of, hey, I don't think they're actually serious about funding my business, because they haven't even taken the time to understand where I'm going to spend this money.
Right. Yeah. Shocking. Or not really.
I know.
So 2 things I should have done at the top of the call. I didn't even introduce myself. I got so excited about all of you. I'm Sarah Friar. I'm the co-founder of Ladies Who Launch with my amazing partner in crime, Kelly McGonigal. And we get to work super closely with our executive director, Julie Kicklout, who I'm sure you've seen on many of these other webcasts. Second thing I should have said is if you have questions, please just drop them into the chat function. Julie is womaning that right now, because we don't man things at Ladies Who Launch, we're womaning that, and she'll push any of your questions to the top of the feed for us. So with that, let me turn over to Nikki and April. So give us a little bit of an introduction, first and foremost, the why of Handsome, how you got there. You're actually sisters, as I discovered. And then I would love to dig into, you guys started to fundraise before COVID really hit us. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what that journey has been like.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I'll go ahead and kick it off. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikki Dominguez. I'm super excited to be here today. I'll give you a background on Handsome. So I am actually a hairstylist. I've been a hairstylist for over 11 years now. Have had my hand in every area of the beauty industry, working behind the chair, building multiple academies across the US. And so really, I've had the opportunity to work with thousands of hairstylists, salon owners, barbers, and we're all experiencing the same issue. Where do we go to find career advice? Where do we go find jobs? Not on Craigslist, that's not a professional platform. Where do we go for community? Where do we go to help peer-to-peer learning? Where do we go for education? And the fact of the matter is there's no place to go out there and find any of this information for the beauty industry, because it's looked at as a fallback career. It's looked at as a second-hand choice. And that's really where Handsome came in, is that we want to give the leading industry for women a platform for them to succeed in their careers and really, achieve what they want to achieve. So before that starts again, I'll go ahead and pass it over to April, and she can talk about our fundraising.
Yeah, so for me, Nikki and I are sisters and co-founders, but my career has been vastly different than Nikki's. And it's really been interesting to assess it, especially in this fundraising environment. I actually spent 6 years at an investment startup where I oversaw our operations, our investor strategy, and our technology strategy. And during that time there, we raised and deployed over $130 million in capital. And so now, coming into this environment of being a female founder, being a minority, Native Indigenous and Latinx female founder, I have really seen the difference of what it actually means to be on the other side of the table. And it's been really interesting because when I was with that investment startup, I was one of the only women at the company, and I was the only minority at the company. But what I recognized was how differently I was treated because I was sitting at a table of all men, and how quickly deals would move along because I was sitting at a table of all men. And you flip the script to today, and I have really seen the difference in how much slower deals move along, or how we can even be canceled before we arrive for that deal. And so I can definitely back up and give a little bit more about our fundraising journey. We started raising in 2018. We have been on, at that time, we were on a rolling fundraise for about 15 months. And so for you in the audience that may not know what that means, we raised $100,000 in July 2018. We got to a proof point, and then we raised another 50K. And then we got to another proof point, and then we raised another 150K. And we did that because we had a really difficult time syndicating one round of investors to come on board at the same time. And so I'll take a pause there and see if there's any specific questions you might have, Sarah.
Sure. So that rolling round is something I hear a lot from other women too, by the way. And it's one of my pet peeves, is that often when investors think they're decreasing risk, they will actually give people smaller amounts. And what they're doing is actually making sure that you all who are trying to run a business don't ever get time to focus on your business because you're always out fundraising. And it's such a terrible tragedy because you're really increasing the risk to the business, because the person who is the bright light of the why is fully distracted. So note to all investors out there. Maybe April and Nikki, could you talk a little bit about how you got in the door with VCs? So I get asked this question all the time from women. How did you actually start to build up who to go, whose door to go knock on and why? How did you build out that network? And then Andrea, I'm gonna come back to you because you actually have some of the funnel stats, which gives a sense of how many people they would actually have to knock on the door of to get to a certain level of fundraising.
In the beginning, when we started to reach out to investors, we got very granular in the beginning. You know, we started with angel investors. So we quite literally built a database, a spreadsheet. Use Airtable, it's free. You know, you can build a CRM in there. And we listed every single person that we knew within our network. And then we looked at those people and started researching on LinkedIn, you know, who are they connected to on LinkedIn? So you have to really access the network that you already have. And if you feel like or think you don't have a network, you do. There is always, you know, there's 7 degrees of separation. You can always find a way in. And so we used our individual network at first. We also attended, I mean, in the beginning days, I was going to 10 networking events a week. I was shaking as many hands as I possibly could. I was getting in front of as many people as I possibly could. And the point of that is so that you can build your credibility as a founder, you can build awareness, you can build a reputation. But while you're doing that, you also need to be simultaneously on your own side, vetting investors out and knowing that, does this investor invest in my business category? You know, do they invest in my stage? And making sure that you're also vetting those investors out at the same time. And I think, to be quite honest, Sarah, for us, getting in the door has never been the problem. We've gotten in the door. You know, we've gotten in the door with very large name firms. We've gotten in the door with hundreds of firms. What has been the problem and the struggle and the hard part is really getting them first to understand and want to understand what we're building, and 2, to not actually cancel us before we arrive to the meeting, because at times it has felt like we've arrived to the meeting, but we were already canceled before the meeting even began.
That actually is a question that's coming in from Kate Brown in the chat. And Andrea, it's actually geared more towards you, but maybe both of you or all 3 of you could dive in, which is, are there ways, just based on what you've seen in how people look at decks, to pre-vet potential investors before taking a meeting? Maybe based on where they spend their time or which slide they've found particular resonance with. And then April and Nikki, if you were thinking about what you know now versus what you knew 12 months ago, like what would be your tells on investors that are actually going to take the time and have some interest versus where you're probably wasting your time? Andrea, why don't I start with you?
Absolutely. So I would say spending a significant amount of time on your fundraising ask would be the first thing you need to look at before you take the meeting. I'm never going to tell somebody not to take a meeting, but understand if you're going into that meeting for feedback on your deck or if you're going into that meeting for a check, because you can treat it very differently. You can use it as a practice pitch for a meeting with an investor that it seems more engaged. If they linger too long on your traction slides and your product slides, I would also say this probably isn't the right investor. If they spend a lot of time on your team slide, it's actually a good sign. Team slides typically have more information. You have a lot of your background for you and your co-founders. If you have LinkedIn links and they click your links and actually go and look at your background, they're starting to invest in you as a team. That's also a really good sign. And the other thing that we found good correlation with is if you kick off your deck with like a why now, why us type of slide, and they spend a bit more time there, those are also really good signs.
Great. April or Nikki, what are your tells on the yes, we should spend more time here, or we should just run, not walk away?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first step is even honing it in a little bit more, not just going in on, do they invest in this type of space and do we fit in their thesis, but do they also see us as a fit as founders? And I think that's something that we've really seen a lot of success over the last couple months prior to any other fundraise that we've done, is that we are really targeting people who believe in women and minority women. And so I think that's been a really big shift and a bonus for us to identify even further.
I would add on to that and just say, to get more detailed about it, quite honestly, if you're looking at an investor, go to their portfolio page, look at if they've invested in women, look at if they've invested in brown founders, Black founders, look at who they've invested in, and we made that shift. We weren't doing that initially. And to be honest, it was because I didn't think we needed to. I knew the data, I knew the stats, but I was like, no, we're going to be an exception to the rule because I had this background in investments. That's what I thought. And so we went after firms that honestly, they don't have very diverse portfolios. And we've made that shift that Nikki is talking about and making sure that who we're going after now, they actually invest in diversity in women in markets that serve the market that we're serving, which is female-led markets.
I remembered what I was going to say on how do you know when to say no or when to walk away so you're not wasting your time. I think one of the things that has really assisted us is not being afraid to ask why. Specifically, give me a why. Why do we not fit into your thesis? What do you see this as a good opportunity? Do you see it as a venture capital play? Do you see us as good founders? And I think that's something that really helped us stop wasting time, is not being afraid to challenge with a question, so that we know if we decide to move further, we know that you actually see this as a good fit, versus we're just going to keep trying to prove and get to another proof point. But the fact that you see us as a viable business and founders.
I think that is such a good point, even in my own fundraising in many different environments. And as I talk to other female entrepreneurs, there's a couple of things I'd want everyone to be mindful of. One is the extra homework investors. So if you have not asked them the why, people are inclined at the end of meetings, and I think they do this particularly with women, and I just don't know if it's a psychological response because they don't want to actually say no. They will ask for more homework. And what I see with women, and I've seen it done to myself, I so want to kind of prove that I can do it, that there's almost like no hoop they couldn't make me go through. Or I've seen other women doing this, cohort analysis and endless data crunching, when the reality is, if we'd all asked the question that Nikki just said, you probably kind of know walking out the door that it's just not for you, and move on and save that kind of time and pain. And I think the second thing is the investors inherently have an incentive to not miss out on the deal. And so they may meet you and kind of say, I don't think this deal is going to happen. But God forbid it becomes a hot deal and they got left behind. And so they're super inclined to never actually say no, right? They just always want to have some skin in the game in case. And so I actually think you create a little bit more of a sense of scarcity if you walk away too. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't stay in touch for future rounds, right? Sometimes it's just not the right fit because of where you are with your business, right? A seed someone who's straddling seed investing with Series A or Series B, you may not fit their portfolio at that moment in time. But I think the stronger move is often to really just say no on your side too. Andrea, we were just talking about the pages and where people dwell, and maybe is there a tell in there? You talked to me in our prep about appendices. So would you advise putting lots and lots of information in the appendix just in case?
Absolutely not. So what we've seen in the data, particularly for all female teams, minority founders, putting an appendix in your send ahead deck actually can get, it's as April was saying, it can get you canceled before you walk in the door, because the appendix is typically used to answer questions that come up. So you keep, when you pitch, your business, you get these certain questions and you're like, oh, I actually have more data about this and I've tucked it into the appendix. So you think you're getting ahead of the game. You're like, oh, I'm going to answer all their questions. It's all going to be in the deck. But you might be answering questions they haven't asked yet and they might not have thought of. And then you're providing backup information and they're like, oh, wait, actually, that is a good point. Why would this and maybe that? And you're giving them, I've discovered in all of this research, if you give a VC a reason to say no, they'll take it, because they don't, they don't, like every business, they can't be experts in every single business. So they're like, gosh, all this looks great. But if you give them one tiny reason to say no, it lets them off the hook. They're like, oh no, it doesn't have the traction, it doesn't have the this. So don't, under no circumstance are you to put an appendix in your send ahead deck. Keep it back. When you do the pitch meeting, you can have those slides there, but it's actually one of the top areas where VCs dwell and can get you canceled.
Yeah. And it actually causes me to ask a question too. So I'm wondering how April and Nikki dealt with this. You've raised money now over a longer period of time. How much has your pitch deck changed from that kind of first incarnation?
Oh, we have hundreds of versions of our deck. Hundreds of versions, and it's because, our business has evolved, our branding has evolved, we've evolved as founders, we've learned a lot and changed it, but also because we've been asked for different things. So yeah, we literally have hundreds of versions of our deck.
Yeah, I kind of wanted you to say that, because that's always my advice too, is that the good thing about meeting with investors when they're giving you homework, as long as it's heading towards a destination and it's not just, fun-filled ways to spend the time, is that often they actually ask great questions. And I've found during that investment phase, when I'm out there looking for money, it often brings back ideas into the business that actually helped with the business. And it's perfectly okay once in a while to kind of draw a line and kind of almost start again. I think you can get tired of a pitch deck, and I think that comes across as you're pitching. I actually just walked through our pitch deck from last year with Nextdoor. We're at a very different stage, right? We're late stage funding. It was like it was a different company almost, which I guess is a good thing because we want our companies to be evolving. But it really reminded me how quickly that data can get stale. There's a question coming in from our wonderful audience. So Karen Soleil is asking, many people who support women require us to be at a higher bar, so not to dilute their other investments. How do you deal with that? April, maybe I'll start with you, because you actually come from an investor background as well.
That's really a tough question, to be honest, because I feel like we're still navigating that. We're still navigating that we're expected to be at a higher bar. And so I, to be honest, have a hard time answering that question, because we are still at this place where it is, I think it's innately ingrained in us as women to go above and beyond and to be overachievers. And you add on to that we are brown women. And so it's like we're constantly fighting to be at this higher bar. So it's almost like this expectation is we're used to it. So we have to become very aware that it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that April is saying. This goes down to, we were having this discussion, I believe, with Andrea not too long ago, and it really is this concept that men are allowed to be visionaries. They're allowed to have an idea and someone will invest in an idea. Women have to go through and have proof points. You know, we have to be 10 steps ahead in order to get the exact same type of treatment. And I think that that does two things. One, it puts you ahead of everybody else that's out there, because now you know you have to work harder. So by the time you've struggled for the first few years of your business and you've really like been scrappy and you're scraping and you're figuring out how to do things organically and with no money, when you get that funding in, it's going to be able to propel you and your business much further than the people who had it easy in the beginning, I feel like. I think the second part of that is being able to be so grounded in your vision and who you are and have that support that nothing is going to stop you. And that turns into fire, and that turns into salesmanship. You know, that turns into being able to sell your business and sell your vision time and time and time again. And eventually somebody's going to come in and they're going to see that and they're going to back you. And I think that it's having a really great network. That's why I feel so, you know, blessed that I have a business partner, because we can bounce ideas off of each other and we can really be there to support each other. So I think that having that support is incredibly important through the entire fundraising business.
I love that answer. I often call it like training at altitude. Like one of these days, we women, and particularly women of color, are going to get down off the goddamn mountain, and we're going to find we're so much fitter than everybody else. We're going to leave them all behind. So we just wait for the day when we come off the mountain, people. But fire in the belly, totally agree. There's a question coming in also saying from Priyanka Ganju. My experience as a woman of color going for investors who have other women of color led companies in their portfolio has been that they say, hey, we've already invested in this space with this one minority founder, AKA check the box, and that ends up being a roadblock. How do you get around this mindset of, you know, there being one and done? I don't know if you've experienced that, ladies.
Yeah, that's a very real thing. You know, it's very frustrating because I've seen big firms come out with these minority focused funds, and then all millions of minorities are running to the starting line, you know, and we're all competing against each other for one small fund. And it's a very real thing, you know, because it's a smaller pool that we're having to dig out of. In terms of Priyanka's question, as far as mindset goes, it is a mindset thing. You know, Sarah, as you were talking about, you know, training at high altitude, quite literally, the way that I visualize this and see this is a marathon. This is an ultra marathon for women. And if we know that we have 100 miles to go, then we can mentally prepare and know that, hey, we're only at 100 investors saying no. We have to get to 200 investors, you know, and that's going to help you mentally be able to stay in it for the long run. So I think the data that DocSend brings is incredibly powerful because it allows you to prepare, which also in turn creates success.
Yeah. And I would say be prepared. What April just ended with, be prepared. Know ahead of time what their thesis is. Know ahead of time if they have an objection to only having one diverse person or company. Figure out how you can actually turn it into a yes. And when you can be prepared and you're anticipating the no, you know the answers of that no, so you can then have a rebuttal. And I think, you know, for us, that's been really powerful to be able to say, well, you know, you've invested in X, Y, and Z companies. How are we different from them, or how are we the same? And I think being prepared is going to really just give you that leg up above everything else too.
Yeah, I definitely think not being afraid to push back, right? It's not that, you know, there's a point where you do need to walk away, but like sometimes people want to see that there is real fire there, that you have the passion. Like being an entrepreneur is a long journey of being the eternal optimist. And so, you know, definitely all investors are leading with people first, right? They're investing behind people, less so even than ideas. And so sometimes it is the test to see, will you come back at them? And so one thing I would say in response to that question of, if there's a feeling of like they've checked the box in a particular space, that's actually foolish, because as an investor, you actually are like, you often want your portfolio to have some concentration. Like you'll find investors say, choose to invest in the fintech space, right? A space I was at when I was at Square, because the learnings they get from one company transfer to another, not stealing people's IP, but just general learnings about the market. Sometimes it's in hiring because they just get into a pool of people that are really good in the space. And so it's foolish if an investor is telling you, you know, we're one and done and on to the next space, because frankly, I would say they're degrading their portfolio. So anyways, probably enough for me. Andrea, there was a question that came in from Janet Watson. What are your recommendations for length of pitch deck? About how many pages? And can you also talk about the order? Like what's a good order for an entrepreneur?
Absolutely. So across the thousands of pitch decks we've looked at, it was incredibly stable, the order and the number of pages. 20 pages, not including any appendices. 20 pages is pretty standard, and you're building a narrative. That's the thing that has also really come through in looking at these pitch decks, is that if it's if it's data forward and point A leads to point B leads to point C, it's actually not going to get you an investment most likely, because there has to be a narrative and a story, and you're a storyteller when you walk in the room. So we found that leading with a problem super simple, one slide, you know, isn't this an easily recognizable problem? Doesn't this make sense to you? Yes, that makes perfect sense to me. Cool. This is why now that problem is the worst problem ever. This is what we propose as our solution. This is the product that we've built to address that solution. Here's some of our competitors. Here's our market size. You know, here's our financials. Here's why we know, because here's the great traction we've had. Like, that's kind of the narrative. And you can shuffle some of those around a little bit, but in general, that's how you kind of want to build it. And you can end, we've seen it a couple of different ways. You can end with your team. Look at, we are absolutely the team to build this, and then wham, hit them with the, give us $3 million for this. Or if you think that you have a really incredibly strong team, we've actually seen some successful decks lead with the team slide and kind of lead with, here's the problem, here's why we're the team to tackle that problem. So tying in the narrative that way, but you really have to think of it as a narrative arc, and you're building like this great problem with this, you know, that's going to only become more intense. And then, we've discovered the solution. Like, you're very much telling a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think weaving in your customers into it as much as possible, right? It's a great place to use a video, for example, testimonial.
Yes.
Nikki and April, what about the ask? How crisp are you with your ask? And I'm assuming it's your build up, so your last slide. And again, how has that changed for you? And how does COVID change that, where everything is done more virtually than in real life?
Yeah, those are great questions. I'm going to start with the COVID piece, because COVID has quite honestly changed everything, and it's in our favor. You know, we've been very fortunate in that, and we've been able to navigate it very well, because we were already working from home. We were already trying to pitch investors on the West Coast, on the East Coast. You know, we're in Austin, Texas. And so COVID really leaned in our favor in terms of our market, because we are a digital network, and in terms of the VC landscape. As far as our ask goes, I mean, we are very direct in our pitch deck and very direct in our conversations. We're raising $700K to achieve these 3 goals: to expand our team, to hire a CTO on full-time in-house, to expand our product, and for customer acquisition. And in 18 months from now, this is where it will get us. You know, and so I think that it's a matter of what Andrea has said and DocSend has said, is making sure that you get those investors to that last slide, because it is the last slide in the deck.
Yeah, I counsel a lot of women on this front about making the ask, and, you know, I'm being crystal clear on it. And if you're asked about the ask, it's not so that you will lower it, right? Often women will come and say, you know, I need $1 million or $700,000. And someone says, really? And then I find people respond, like if I'm kind of acting it out with them and they're practicing, and I'll like press harder, and then they'll respond with something like, but, you know, for $500,000, I'm like, oh my God, you just cut your ask in half by 50% right in front of me. So if I thought you really had this all scoped out, now you're giving me a lot of concern. So don't view people asking pressing questions as the time for you to lower your ask. Like, say it, put a big smile on your face, and zip it unless they ask you a question in return. So I'm really happy to hear how specific you're being with that ask. And now I'm just watching my time a little. Quick question from Heidi Solomon. What if you don't have a team? If you're a sole proprietor, do you include advisory members, or is it better to bring in a partner? And I don't know, Andrea, it looks like maybe you're shaking your head there. Maybe you start.
Yes. So we, as part of this research, we actually looked at, because it's a question that I hear all the time whenever we're out at events, back when those were a thing. We would get the question of like, well, what if I'm a solo founder? Do I need to bring on a co-founder? How hard is it for me to raise? So we added that to the research, and we found that being a solo founder is definitely hard, but it's not as hard as having too many founders. If you get more than 3 founders, investors start to get a bit wary, because are you all going to make it to the end? Having a founder breakup is obviously incredibly difficult and usually means the dissolution of the company. And if you have too many voices in the room, how are you deciding which direction to go? If you have 5 founders, 6 founders, like, how are you guys figuring this out? So we found that for a solo founder, it's about the same level of difficulty as having like 3 to 4 founders. So ideal is 2, 3 is really good. And having that solo founder, like, it's still absolutely possible to raise. It's just slightly harder. What I would say is what we did find on the team side. I mean, go into it on your team slide. The average words per team slide that we found optimal is around 80 to 120, which on most slides on your deck, you're going to want around 50 words. Somebody can kind of get the gist of what's going on and move on. So you have 80 to 120 words to play with on your team slide. Really go into depth about why you're the person to solve this problem and why you have that background. And then if you have key strategic advisors, or you've already gotten an investor that kind of makes your case and shows why you're the person, absolutely include them. But if not, then, you know, the reason that you're asking for money is to go build a team. That's the point. So feel confident that you're the person that's going to solve the problem.
I think really wise words in there. Here's a question coming in from Kirsty Tricallan. Sorry if I'm butchering your surname there, Kirsty. Thank you for the great shares. I've been given the advice as a woman founder, don't ask for less than $1 million. So it's the perfect question for April and Nikki, because you're asking for slightly less than $1 million. Her rationale that she's been given is, it sounds more like you will need a loan than an investment. How did you think about that, right? You know, if you're less than $1 million, is it worth it for investors, or would you be better off going and getting some sort of small business loan?
You first have to think about what type of business you have. Is this a business that is that requires venture capital? You know, if this is not a business that requires venture capital, then obviously you want to be going more towards that small business loan. But if your business, if that's what your goal is to raise venture capital, and you have a very specific growth plan, then of course, you know, you have to be strategic about what you're raising. And so more isn't always more. You know, the reason that we went through and decided to raise what we're raising is because we know exactly what we're going to do with that money. We know exactly how far it's going to take us. We know the goals that we need to hit in order to get there. So it's not really about the amount. It's about what you're going to do with it and what the end result is going to be at the end of that runway. And so when you know that information, I don't think we've never had anybody say that's, you know, go raise loan money. I mean, we've had other things said, but it's a matter of knowing this is exactly what we need, why we need it, what this is going to give us at the end of the day. And when you know that information, then it's showing you've done your homework, you've done your research, you've prepared out, you know, the next 18 months or however long you're raising money for. So I think that would be my answer. April?
Yeah, I would add on to it, and I would just say, to be honest, I blatantly disagree with any investor that says don't raise less than $1 million, because we raised $600,000 on an angel round, and we did that, and it was successful for us. You know, it got us to those next proof points. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if you raise too much capital and you're not very far along and you're in your pre-seed, you can give up way more equity in your company in the beginning than if you raise $300K or $700K. And then you raise a much larger seed round in the future. You know, so I definitely agree with everything that Nikki says. You need to raise the amount of money that you need to get to that next significant milestone in your company.
Yeah, I think you both nailed it for me. One is like precision on what you're asking for and why. and not getting rolled around too much on that. And then I think the second point about the dilution that you're going to take, like how much of your business are you going to sell, particularly in those early phases, right? You know, maybe it's a friends and family round, and then maybe it's even a pre-seed, right? You need to be really careful because you could get all the way. If you think about where I'm at in a company, right? I've just raised, I think it's a Series F, right? You don't want to get to the point where there's kind of nothing left of the pie. I feel differently at this end of the spectrum about taking more money if it's on offer, because frankly, at the scale I'm raising at, the dilution, I'd rather have like slightly less of a much bigger pie than get too nickel and dimey, but that's at the other end of the fundraising spectrum. Okay, we are, unfortunately, I think we're there timing wise. I have maybe, if I take one more question, ladies, are you in for one more? Because it's very good. Okay, so one more question, which is maybe actually more for April and Nikki, because you have investors. How do you make your investors work for you? And I'm kind of paraphrasing Yvette Leslie's question, because she said, you know, I find they're impressed and they love to tell you what your mistakes are, but they don't really want to help. So I'm going to spin the question the other way. How do you get your investors to work for you? Because I am a big fan of this, by the way.
This is a really important question. It's a very, very important question, you know, because there's a difference between having smart investors and a party round. And a party round is when a bunch of investors just come in and they put some money in, and then you're off to the races by yourself. And especially if you're an early stage founder, first time founder, solo founder, anybody you bring into your network, you need to get them to work for you. You know, and so for us in the beginning days when we were raising angel money, what that meant is we literally asked every investor for 10 to 20 more intros, and we hounded them. We were not shy or embarrassed. We hounded them via email, phone calls, text messages, showed up at the bar they hung out at.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah, and when you could go, you know, pre-COVID, but we did everything we could. And at that point, we needed connections to more angel investors. Another thing that we do is we are very communicative with our investors. That's something I'm very hyper proud of. You know, we were sending out weekly emails to our investors every Friday. So they knew everything that was going on and the ask that we needed that week. And we would ask for, hey, we need a contract CTO. We need help with our development, our engineering, our branding. And we would keep them in the loop and ask them in our emails and in an individual level. And I think now that we are raising our first equity priced round, it's our pre-seed round, the investors are very different and from angel investors, and in a refreshing and exciting way. The investors that we're talking to want to be in these conversations all the time. They want to be a part of those conversations. And I think it's really setting that standard in the forefront and saying, we want you to be an extension of our team, and making sure that those expectations are set equally on both sides.
Yeah. And I'll just tack on one last thing to that. So I want to talk about, you know, the last part of that question where, like, you know, people are always willing to give you feedback and point out your mistakes. And, you know, we had that early on as well. Everybody has that because everybody has an opinion. And I think what you need to do, and what we had to learn how to do, was not take that feedback whiplash, you know, and you're getting it here and here and here and here and here, and you're hearing all of this feedback coming at you. And your job, owner and founder, is to take all of that feedback and be able to filter what's important to you and your business. And ultimately, you're the one making that decision until it comes time for board seats and building out a board for your company, which shouldn't be till later anyway. But I think that's something that we really learned early on, is welcome the feedback. There's going to be a lot of negative feedback. There's going to be a lot of positive feedback, and you can't attach to either one. You just have to go through and decide which of that feedback is really going to pertain to you and your business, and not take it personally, because it's just that feedback.
Yeah. I couldn't say it any better, frankly. And running a consumer app like Nextdoor, everyone has some feedback. And so I just actually have a phrase. I say, thank you for your input, which is my way of saying, I may have gotten something great or not there, but I'm not going to react to it. Like, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do with it. But thank you for your input. I thought that point about sending out a couple of the companies where I have angel investments personally, they send their PPPs, their people performance and plans for the week, And people love to be asked for help. So I would lean into that more. Don't be shy. And particularly in an email format, sometimes I can like notice something that makes all the sense in the world where I could make an introduction, and then other weeks it just breezes past me. But I think not making the ask is just like a waste. Why not? So with that, we're going to have to end. I do want to remind, if you want to see more of that amazing DocSend information, you can find it, I'm sure, on the DocSend website, but if you go to Ladies Who Launch as well, we have collated a whole bunch of different resources, particularly around funding, at ladieswholaunch.org/capital. And I just want to say a huge thank you to all three of the amazing women on this call today. So Andrea, thank you for your work, which intrigued us so much that it gave birth to this whole webinar. So thank you, thank you. And April and Nikki, so good luck with the Handsome app. It looks amazing. You guys are going to be total rock stars, I can tell just from my 2 interactions with you now. And to all you ladies out there building and running and growing your businesses, we all have your back, so go for it. Don't let anything get you down. Remember, we're training at altitude, and my God, we're going to be awesome when we all get down on the flat. So with that, have a great rest of day. Take care now.
Thank you.